I'm not daddy's little girl anymore. And with those chilling words, one of the biggest heels ever was officially born. Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, bringing to you another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. And December 12th, 1999 marks 25 years ago that history was made at the Armageddon 99 pay per view when Stephanie McMahon shocked the entire world when she turned on her father, Vince McMahon, and joined forces with her husband, Triple H, to kick off the McMahon Helmsley era. And for today's special edition, I am going to be discussing the success and failures of Stephanie McMahon's heel run from December 1999 to March 2002. So, anybody who knows me very well, I have always had a thing for Stephanie McMahon. Aside from being very, very good looking, I have always been intrigued and very fascinated by Stephanie McMahon because as a wrestling fan growing up, I was never really into the whole diva thing. You know, back in secondary school, a lot of the guys would always talk about their ideal lady from wrestling, and the names that always came up was Trish Stratus, sometimes Terry Runnels, occasionally Deborah. Lita, her name might get thrown around here and there, but whenever somebody asked me who is my ideal lady from wrestling, without hesitation and without fail, I would always say Stephanie McMahon. And everyone would look at me as I was nuts. They would say, "Oh, why would you like Stephanie for? She's horrible. She's not that great looking. She's nowhere near as good as Trish Stratus or Lita." But Stephanie McMahon wasn't really what you would call your traditional diva. And that's what always intrigued me about her because she was more than just a pretty face. She was an integral part of the show. She was a manager, and she would always mix it up with the big names, whether it was Mick Foley, The Rock, Stone Cold, The Undertaker, sometimes Kane, Kurt Angle, you name it. Stephanie McMahon was right in the thick of things, and that's what I always liked about her. And aside from the obvious of being really good looking, Stephanie McMahon, as an on screen performer and character, I personally think she is one of the greatest heels of all time because what makes Stephanie McMahon such a unique heel is the nuclear heat she could draw from the fans is just off the charts. And she was so good at making people hate her, whether it was her annoying, screechy voice or the way she would just complain about things. Everything about Stephanie just screamed supervillain. And, the way she would dress, the high heel leather boots, the leather outfits, you name it. Stephanie McMahon looked the part of a wrestling heel's wife slash girlfriend. She was brilliant. And the way she would rub up a lot of wrestlers, getting under their skin, was excellent. And the way she would sell a loss, whether it was a defeat at her own hands or Triple H's defeat, she knew how to sell a devastating loss. She would sell a loss like she just lost her job or she was told that she had to go and find a real job, or something like that. The way she was able to put over a defeat was priceless. An example of, "I have to go and get a real job." Excellent. "It's your fault. Hunter lost the title." Priceless. Absolutely priceless. And the evolution of Stephanie McMahon is just one of the most interesting developments in wrestling history because you look at Stephanie from when she first appeared on TV. I mean, she made a little cameo in December 1998. She had a little run in with Stone Cold. I think Stone Cold was looking for The Undertaker and Paul Bearer. And I think this was before their Buried Alive match. And Stone Cold just said to Stephanie, "Have you seen The Undertaker and Paul Bearer?" And Stephanie would say, "No, I haven't seen them at all." And that would be it. And Stephanie McMahon would make her official debut on WWF TV in April 1999 when The Undertaker and the Ministry were stalking her. And she would be kidnapped, and Stone Cold would come to the rescue, and she would occasionally pop up now and then on TV for various segments, usually involving Vince and Shane. But Stephanie never really had a big role on TV until she hooked up with Test, when Test and Shane had this feud over Stephanie, and the Mean Street Posse were involved as well. So it was obvious from the beginning that Stephanie McMahon, was going to be a big part of WWF TV, and obviously the company had very high hopes for Stephanie. But Stephanie McMahon wouldn't really come into her own as an on screen performer until November 99 when she was set to marry Test, and then Triple H came out to gate crash the wedding and showed footage of Stephanie drugged up, passed out in the car, and Triple H married her in a drive-through wedding at Las Vegas. And that would pretty much lay the groundwork for what we would come to know Stephanie McMahon for. So all throughout the build-up to Armageddon 99, Stephanie showed no interest in Triple H whatsoever. She couldn't stand him. And Vince was pretty much going into this match to defend his daughter's honor, just like he's done many times before. I personally think, Stephanie turning on Vince, I would have probably saved that for Raw. I think it should have been Test versus Triple H because, Test got ditched at the altar. He was humiliated. And I think Stephanie turning on Test would have made a lot more sense. But hey ho, I wasn't booking these things at the time, but I just would have done that. So fast forward to Armageddon 99, Triple H versus Vince McMahon in a no holds barred Falls Count Anywhere match with some very interesting stipulations. If Triple H won, his marriage stays intact and he gets a title match whenever he wants. If Vince wins, Triple H will never get another title match again, and the marriage between Stephanie and Hunter is off, annulled, finished, kaput. And it looked like at one point Vince had the match won. He had the sledgehammer in his hand, ready to take off Hunter's head. Stephanie, who was sitting in the front row, jumped over the rail into the ring and said to her dad, "Let me hit him." And the place went absolutely nuts, of course. And Stephanie had the sledgehammer in her hand, ready to knock Triple H out. Triple H was in classic heel mode, begging for his life. And Stephanie just dropped the hammer, and everyone was like, "Oh, she can't do it. We don't blame her. It's too much for her." And then pushes her out of the way, smacks Vince with the sledgehammer, pins him 1, 2, 3. Triple H wins the match. Stephanie looks on in absolute disbelief and fear for her life, and Triple H puts the hammer down, has a big evil smile on his face, and then Stephanie breaks into an evil smile, hugs Triple H and kisses him, and boom, Stephanie had officially turned heel, much to the shock of everyone. So when I first saw this, I was in complete disbelief. Why would Vince's precious daughter, Daddy's little girl, Why would she turn on her dad and side with his most hated enemy, Triple H? Now, prior to this, the feud between Triple H and Vince McMahon had got menacingly personal. You know, unlike Stone Cold and Vince McMahon, which was more about entertainment, Stone Cold sticking it to the boss, the blue collar guy beating up the boss that everyone would love to do the same thing. Triple H and Vince McMahon's feud was not really based on entertainment. This was about who can one up the other. Two of the biggest egos ever. Who's going to outplay whom? The devil himself or the cerebral assassin? Who is the game? No pun intended. And it was a shocking moment. But the surprises wouldn't stop there because the next night on Raw, Vince McMahon would call out Triple H. Triple H's music would hit, but instead of Triple H coming out, we would see Stephanie McMahon come out in a brand new look. Gone was the fresh faced daddy's little girl, butter wouldn't melt. In her place was this leather pants wearing, long punk permed like hair, and this long sleeve top. Stephanie McMahon, it was unbelievable because if you was to take two pictures, Stephanie McMahon from Armageddon and Stephanie McMahon from the next time Raw, they wouldn't even look the same. They look like two completely different people. Stephanie didn't have much makeup the night before. Her hair was pretty straight. She looked like a normal little girl. But then you look at Stephanie the next night, she was grown up, big, massive hair, long, high heel boots, leather pants, you name it. She just looked like a punk chick, like a rock chick sort of thing. And even the commentary was on point. JR and the King were like, wow, Stephanie looks completely different. And what I liked about Stephanie's heel turn, it wasn't just, oh, I turned heel because I like Triple H. I thought her heel turn was interesting and justified because Stephanie brought up some very good points where she explained to her dad that, you know, you had me abducted by The Undertaker to be sacrificed in a dark wedding just so you could get back at Stone Cold. You hurt me, you used me as a pawn. And I thought, okay, I was shocked at Stephanie turning heel, but now, after she said all this, she's right. Whether you like her or not, whether you agree with how she did it, Stephanie was only telling the truth. Her reasons for siding with Triple H was to get back at her dad for, the whole abduction thing with The Undertaker and the ministry. Makes perfect sense. And what I like about heel turns is not just, oh, I'm a bad guy now. I like heel turns where they're justified. There's a good reason why a wrestler or someone does what they do. It makes perfect sense for the story. And Stephanie's reasons for turning heel were completely understandable, justified. And I remember some people actually popped when she told the truth. And I thought, even King, who's always been known as McMahon's cheerleader, even he agreed. Oh, it's all starting to come back now to Vince, isn't it? So even the commentators, even JR, who was like a cheerleader of Vince, even he kind of agreed, like, you know what? Stephanie brings up some good points. So after Vince stormed out of the company, leaving just Triple H and Stephanie in charge, this was where Stephanie really came into her own as a heel as we move forward into the year 2000. She just made everyone's life a living hell alongside her husband, Triple H. The thing is, though, with Triple H, he was already the biggest heel ever. He was so hated. But I think when you added Stephanie to the mix, it just made him even bigger. And Stephanie, she was super hated. You know, there were very few ladies in wrestling at that time who had more heat than Stephanie McMahon. And the very fact that she renamed herself to Stephanie McMahon Helmsley just cemented her heel status even more. And she was a big part of the Attitude Era all throughout the 2000s, you know, getting into verbal wars with The Rock, especially Chris Jericho. I think if I can think of one opponent who Stephanie mixed it up with on the mic in terms of trading insults, Chris Jericho is definitely number one. You know, those two had some of the most legendary roasting sessions ever. Usually Stephanie would come out second best, but they were just classic TV. And, you know, the way Stephanie was able to put guys over. You know, if you was to do something to Stephanie, like roast her or insult her, you were made as a face, and that's how good Stephanie was as a heel. Because I never forget. I think it was in August 2000. I never forget this. I think Stephanie got knocked out by accident by Triple H. The whole place just went nuts. It was unbelievable. Or there was another moment when at WrestleMania 2000, after Vince screwed The Rock, you know, he laid the smackdown on Shane, gave him a rock bottom, gave Vince a rock bottom. Stephanie got in Rock's face, slapped him. Rock gave her a massive rock bottom. The place went mental. And then he finished her off with a people's elbow to close the show. And the place just went mad. And I think in terms of heat, other than Vince, Stephanie bathed in heat. If nuclear radiation was shower gel, Stephanie McMahon would be right there in there. She was just so hated. And she won the women's title from Jacqueline, who did absolutely nothing in the match. It was all of DX got involved. She held that title and never even defended it. She just walked around with Hunter holding the gold, and that just made her even more hated because the very fact that she never even defended the title was just epic. And she finally lost the title to Lita in August, and the place just went mad. Only thing I would have done with that is I probably would have had Stephanie lose the title at maybe SummerSlam. I think that would have been a great time. Or King of the Ring 2000. You know, Triple H loses the title at King of the Ring, and then the same night Stephanie loses the title. I think that would have been even better. Still a great moment, but I think that should have been saved for a pay per view, personally. And then some of Stephanie's best work would be with Kurt Angle. You know, we had that whole love triangle thing where Stephanie was friends with Kurt Angle, but she was still loyal to her husband. You know, the whole thing with, oh, we're just friends, Hunter, nothing more, you know, because I think with Stephanie and Kurt, they had great chemistry. There's no question about it. And I believe I read somewhere that the plan was to have Stephanie turn on Triple H and go off with Kurt Angle. Obviously, that plan got thrown out the window. Can you imagine if that had happened? Stephanie turning on her husband and siding with Angle. The heat she would have got would have been unbelievable. I would have loved to have seen that, just to hear the fans' reaction. And Stephanie, again, right there in the thick of things, even though she wasn't an on screen wrestler per se, she was such a strong presence and, you know, such a hated heel. Even when Triple H was getting cheered as a heel, people still hated Stephanie. That just tells you how good she was at her job. But I think Stephanie, for me, reached her peak probably around 2001 to 2002 because Stephanie McMahon officially competed in her first pay-per-view match, which was at No Way Out 2001 against Trish Stratus, which was actually a really good match. I thought it was surprisingly very good. Thankfully, it didn't go on for too long. I think it went on for about maybe 7 or 8 minutes. And Stephanie just kicked Trish's ass, and she got the win thanks to William Regal, who was the commissioner at the time. And she was a great heel. You know, as great as she was in 2000, I think she got even better in 2001. And after Triple H got hurt, Stephanie became the owner of ECW, hooked up with her brother Shane, who was running WCW, and they formed the alliance. And Stephanie McMahon turned on her father Vince. You know, it's kind of funny because Vince was in complete shock. I mean, Vince must have a very short memory. I mean, this is the same girl who turned on you at Armageddon 99 and hooked up with your hated enemy, her husband, Triple H. So Vince should have known Stephanie's track record. But, you know, the old wrestling logic, you know, everyone forgets, but, you know, Stephanie turning on her father Vince doesn't really surprise me that whole much. I mean, yes, it's a shock that she became the owner of ECW, but turning on her father, yeah, I wasn't really that surprised that much. But it was still a shock to see her and Shane working together to try and put their dad out of business. Because, I mean, didn't Stephanie drive her dad out of the company back in '99 so that Triple H and her could run the whole thing? Yeah, so, you know, people who remember these things shouldn't be that shocked. And throughout the rest of 2001, Stephanie looked great. I have to say that because it's true. But she was also a great heel as well. And, you know, when Triple H got hurt, a lot of people felt sorry for her because, oh, you know, well, we don't really like your husband, but we don't want to see anybody get hurt. It sucks. So everybody was very sympathetic to Stephanie. But then once she hooked up with Shane, yeah, that sympathy died off very quickly. And she was awesome throughout that time. She got into verbal battles with The Rock. Chris Jericho, again, never gets old seeing those two trading insults and words to each other on the mic. And again, she was in the thick of things. You know, she was managing Rhino, she was managing Booker T for a little while, Rob Van Dam as well. She was right there in the thick of things, you know, just mixing it up with all of the big names. And when the Alliance finally went out of business, when they lost the winner take all match to Team WWF at Survivor Series 2001, I still remember that, seeing that shot of Stephanie on her knees, bawling her eyes out like she just got declared bankrupt. She was like, no! As I said earlier, if there was anybody in wrestling who could sell a loss, it's Stephanie. She can sell a loss like she just lost her house or her job or she went bankrupt. She is brilliant at things like that. You know, her whole attitude of, that means I gotta get a real job now. It's brilliant. You know, no one can do it better than Stephanie. She's awesome. She really, really is. And Stephanie would return to WWF TV in January 2002, around the time that Triple H made his triumphant return. And Stephanie was trying to more or less worm her way back into the company and back into her dad's good books, which of course worked. And this for me, this is where Stephanie really reached her peak as a heel. I think by this point she was an awesome heel, but I think after turning heel in December '99 and now we're in January 2002, I think she kind of like ran her course as a heel. I think she pretty much done it all, but she was still great. She still looked great. Nothing ever changed in that department. But I think as an on-screen performer, after what, nearly 2.5 years as a heel, yeah, I think the writing was on the wall, and I think it was time to freshen her up. And you know, she tried this whole fake pregnancy thing to keep Triple H, who was pretty much done with her by this point. He had enough of her, and their marriage fell apart when Triple H said it was over, and she hooked up with Kurt Angle. Yeah, her and Angle together was great, but didn't really mean much because the marriage between Hunter and Steph was done. I think it would have meant more if she had turned on Hunter back in 2000. I think it would have meant a lot more. Here it was just like two heels working together to take down the babyface. That was all it was. The whole War of the Roses thing was great. Great stuff. Some great promo work between Triple H and Stephanie. And Stephanie's such a good sport. A lot of people give her a lot of flack for, you know, making people look foolish. But if you look back at the old days of the Attitude Era, Stephanie knew how to make a face. As I said, all you had to do was knock her down, whether it was by accident, and the place would go absolutely nuts. That's how good Stephanie is. I know in later years she was built up to be this untouchable heel. No one could get the last word on her. No one could own her. Yeah, that got on my nerves. I can talk about that maybe for another time if you guys want, but I think what made Stephanie's heel run around this time, she took a lot of her cues from her dad because Vince was such a good sport. He wasn't afraid to make a fool out of himself to get the face over for the good of the show, for the good of the fans. And Stephanie was the same as well. I'll never forget that time back in 2001. I had to mention this one was Chris Jericho threw a cake in her face. I think it was her birthday or something like that. I can't remember exactly when it was, but Chris Jericho had brought in this massive cake and just threw it in Stephanie's face. And Stephanie was like on her knees, covered in cake and cream, and was just screaming at the top of her voice. It was just excellent stuff. And there was another moment. I mean, I have to bring this up before we go forward, where Jericho mentioned about Stephanie's boob job, and he like put a before picture and an after picture. I think the picture he put up was Stephanie from '99 or something like that. It was quite an old picture, and she had like very small boobs, and it moved to like 2001. Stephanie had her boob job, and Jericho said something along the lines of, My, hasn't the $1 billion princess grown up so much on TV the last few years? Let's have a look, shall we?" That sort of thing I would have expected from The Rock because he was known for things like that, but Jericho was just excellent. So all throughout leading up to WrestleMania 18, Stephanie would try everything she could to screw Triple H and prevent him from going to the main event. She even hooked up with Chris Jericho at one point, which was fun but weird, especially as those two absolutely roasted each other throughout the Attitude Era. And now they're working together. Yeah, it was just weird, but still good. And Triple H finally got his hands on his wife. He delivered a pedigree to her at WrestleMania 18. Massive pop. And he got the undisputed title from Jericho. And then Stephanie came out the next night in a neck brace, selling the pedigree. And Triple H challenged her to a match, which was a triple threat match with Jericho. He said, "If I beat you, you're done. You're gone. History. Out of the WWF forever." And Stephanie got pinned after Triple H gave her a spine buster, and she was gone. And that pretty much was the end of Stephanie McMahon's heel run And of course, as we all know, she would be brought back by Vince back in July 2002 as the SmackDown general manager, which I probably will talk about at some point, her run as SmackDown GM. But, you know, it's an amazing evolution. You know, you look at Stephanie when she came on TV in '99. You know, this little innocent daddy's little girl, butter wouldn't melt sort of thing. You know, and then fast forward to the end of the year, she turned into like one half of the biggest heel couple ever, and then she'll go on to become an even bigger heel in her own right. It's incredible, you know, to think that this little innocent girl who was the boss's daughter would go on to become one of the biggest heels ever, and a very good looking one too, by the way. I mean, I always thought Stephanie was good looking anyway when she first came in, but I think she got better when she completely changed her whole presentation from top to bottom. She just looked like a completely different person. But it's an amazing evolution, one that I was very fortunate to see and watch growing up as a wrestling fan. And in terms of the success and failures of Stephanie McMahon's heel run from '99 to 2002, a complete success, a surprising one, but a complete success. I thought she was absolutely amazing. The way she helped get the faces over, the way she took bumps, the way she would get nuclear heat, the way she would sell at loss. She was an amazing heel, you know, winning the women's title and not defending it for months on end. Tremendous stuff. She really was a big part of the Attitude Era. And I think around that time, I don't think we had many female heels quite like that. I know Trish Stratus was a heel, but she wasn't as big of a heel as Stephanie. I don't think there are many big heels from the female side who were as big as Stephanie. I think she definitely was the biggest, and she was incredible. She really was. And, you know, just going through memory lane, some of the big moments involved Stephanie, whether it was Stephanie getting a stunner or Stephanie getting a rock bottom, you know, or getting knocked down by Triple H, or Triple H giving her a pedigree, you know, or Jericho putting her in the walls of Jericho. Brilliant stuff. And, you know, Chris Benoit giving her a headbutt as well. You know, she took some bumps. You know, people forget that. You know, Stephanie wasn't afraid to take bumps. She didn't probably take as many bumps in the later years, but in those days, she was amazing. She really was a team player when it was called for. But yeah, her whole heel run was a complete success. I loved every second of it. The only failures I would say, and there weren't that many, the only failures I would say is she should have dropped the women's title to Lita at a pay per view. I think that should have happened. And I wouldn't really put the blame on her. I blame it more on booking, but I personally think if Stephanie was going to turn heel and side with Triple H, she should have done it against Test. It should have happened at Armageddon. I would have still kept that. But instead of Vince being the one betrayed, it should have been Test. And then the next night, you know, Vince called her out and says, "Why did you turn on Test? You know, what are you doing? Why are you with Triple H?" Could have kept all that, but I just would have made a couple of little changes. But other than that, the whole run was brilliant. It really was. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Stephanie McMahon's heel run from 1999 to 2002? Did you enjoy it? What year would you say was her best year as a heel? 99, 2000, 2001, or 2002? And what was your thoughts on Stephanie turning heel for the first time? Do you think it was justified? Do you think she was in the right to turn on her father Vince? And also, what was your favourite moment involving Stephanie McMahon? And where would you rank Stephanie in history in terms of the top heels? Would you put her up there as one of the best ever? And do you look at her whole heel run as a success or failure? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.